Authorities in 3 states are on high alert with coronavirus outbreaks at schools, a nursing home and on a live export ship. The number of active COVID-19 cases in Australia continues to fall, but for the first time in 19 days, South Australia recorded a new infection. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has issued a stark warning that coronavirus is actually on the way up. So here are today's developments on COVID-19. Officials in Perth are scrambling to work out the extent of the outbreak on a ship at Fremantle as the state and federal governments trade barbs over whether WA was warned about illness on board. 2 schools in Sydney's east are closed for deep cleaning and contact tracing after 2 pupils tested positive for COVID-19 one day after classrooms were reopened. In Melbourne, 2 staff members at an aged care home in Camberwell have tested positive to COVID-19 a week after a resident was diagnosed with the illness. As countries lift restrictions, the World Health Organization says there's a long way to go in the pandemic and warns the disease is still on the way up. The organisation says the Americas are the new epicentre, predicting a surge in deaths in Brazil. And there'll be a further easing of restrictions in Italy from Monday when cultural centres, including the Colosseum in Rome and the ancient city of Pompeii, will reopen. Visitors will have to wear masks and maintain social distancing. So here, 2 staff members at a Melbourne aged care centre have tested positive to COVID-19 a week after a resident was diagnosed with the illness. Stephanie Ferrier reports from Melbourne.
There are now 3 cases linked to Linden Aged Care at Camberwell in Melbourne's eastern suburbs after 2 staff members tested positive there. Now, the centre is already in lockdown after a resident tested positive there last week, although health authorities say that these 2 staff members weren't originally identified as being close contacts of that resident, so they're not quite sure how they've contracted coronavirus, but they are making sure to quarantine all of those 2 staff members' close contacts as well. Now, this comes as a second resident at Hammond Care in Caulfield in Melbourne's southeastern suburbs returned some conflicting results. That resident initially tested positive to coronavirus, but a subsequent test has come back as negative. Now, this is the same situation that happened to an 84-year-old woman in the facility's dementia unit there last week, who tested positive originally, but then had 2 subsequent negative tests. Now, Hammond Care has written to the families as well as residents saying that this situation is odd and unusual and very confusing, but they're obviously taking no chances, and that centre will remain in lockdown until at least next Tuesday while they await the 3rd test result for this second resident. Now, we've heard from Victoria's Chief Health Officer, Professor Brett Sutton, and he says while it is unusual, this can sometimes happen with various laboratories who also are testing for other strains of coronavirus that might not actually be COVID-19. And while it's not common to have these sorts of conflicting test results, it can happen when you're testing some 10,000 tests every day.
The federal government maintains it properly notified the WA government about sick crew members on board a live export ship which docked in Fremantle last week. Reporter David Webber has more.
Yesterday, the Premier, Mark McGowan, said that the government hadn't found out until Sunday that there were health problems on the Q8, and then subsequently 6 members of the crew tested positive to COVID-19. Now, he was angry about this because he said the port should have been told, the port authority should have been told, and the Agriculture Department hit back last night saying that they had indeed informed the WA Health Department in an email, which I've got here, and the email says the vessel is due to berth at Fremantle at about 2:20. This is on Friday last week. Unsure of any crew changes, but we have received the following information concerning 3 ill crew members. Elevated body temperature in the past 48 hours between 37 and 37.8 degrees. The state government said in the wake of that yes, that email had been sent and hadn't been acted on because the health officials didn't go on board until Monday. There were quite a few other personnel from other departments, from AMSA, Federal Department of Agriculture, The Fremantle Ports Authority and Path West had gone on at different times. Sorry, Path West was later, but those other ones over the weekend, taking full precautions. And it should also be remembered that the people on the vessel were never going to get off the boat as such, because of the quarantine period at Fremantle meant that they were going to stay on there for 2 weeks. It's not as if they were going to be walking around in Fremantle or anything like that. But yeah, the government had admitted that email went to the Public Health Emergency Operations Centre on the Friday, but it says that the email explicitly stated there was no concern for COVID-19, despite talking about those issues with fever. Now, the Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud, had something to say about this morning. This is some of what he had to say.
Health officials in each state undertake their own protocols and investigation. We don't have those skill sets. We look after plants and animals, and we've done everything that would be asked of us in terms of that protocol, and we'll continue to work. There's no barbs.
So no doubt the Premier will have something to say about that later on today.
Now, 2 Sydney schools have had to temporarily shut their gates after 2 students tested positive to coronavirus. Reporter Lily Mayers joins us now from Sydney's east. Lily, what can you tell us about these school closures?
Good morning, Ros. Well, both Waverley College and Maria College will remain closed today after 2 students tested positive to COVID-19 yesterday. Here at Waverley, a Year 7 student tested positive. That caused the school's senior campus to close and for students to be sent home. Just around the corner, 2 kilometres away at Maria College, a Year 5 student tested positive. The college confirmed that student had been on campus last Thursday, so the school will now be closed until next week so we can undergo a deep clean, and also contact tracing can continue. In the meantime, students will be continuing their studies online. The New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian said we can expect these temporary school closures as new infections are recorded, but importantly, both independent and public schools now have COVID response plans in place, and those were put into motion here yesterday, Ros.
Thanks, Lily.